Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for watching Sustainable Japan Project YouTube channel. We have launched this channel back in January 2022 in order to achieve our mission of creating a more sustainable world by inviting people from all fields and sectors at the global level in order to discuss more sustainable cross-border business for our planet 100 years from now. My name is Wakako from ASTERI Corporation, which is one of the founding members of Sustainable Japan Project, and I will be the MC for today's session. So for the month of June, we have Andrew Crosby, the founder of Third Horizon Earth. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us, and welcome.
Hi, Wakako. It's wonderful to be with you. It's great to see you again. And I love that you have a 100-year perspective. This is great.
Yes.
I share it.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so let's get started. And first of all, we'd like to know a lot about you and your background, your life story, and how you led yourself to where you're now.
Yeah, no, I'll give you a background of how I got to Third Horizon Earth. So I'm American. I live in Geneva, Switzerland now, and my family and I have nearly 20 years here in Switzerland. But I grew up in the US in a state called Minnesota, which is in the border of Canada, and towards the center of the country, east-west. And growing up there, I had a huge amount of time in contact with the outdoors. I spent a lot of time canoeing. I was a hunter. My dad took me hunting, and according to my dad, there was never a bad day of hunting, whether we ever got a bird or not. There was always learning about the balance of nature. And so my growing up there, I think, was an important part of who I am, because I was always in touch with nature, always outside looking around, always exploring. The other thing I told myself was, you're never lost, just confused. And so that's kind of a motto for me in terms of how I've gone around life. I also had two heroes when I was 10 years old. So one was Martin Luther King Jr., who was a civil rights leader in the United States in the 1960s, a very powerful and impressive man. And the other was the first moon landing. So those are kind of emblematic of who I was in my early life. And I sort of followed these things. So I was always interested in nature, and I was always interested in justice, and I was always interested in just exploring things. So as a young person, I did a lot of different things. I worked on merchant ships. I sailed around the world on oil tankers principally, learned what it was like to be working in the ocean. I did things like construction work and so on. So I did quite a lot of things, and I realized that those weren't those were not enough for me. So I wanted to go to college, and I eventually went to NYU in New York and had a great experience there. And I was hired out of NYU to launch something called the Hotline, which was the first national daily publication on US politics back in the 1980s. In 1986, 87 actually, we launched. And if you think about a lot of the modern political coverage you see today, a lot of it was started with that publication. We were the first ones that were sort of bringing context and news on a daily basis from places that people couldn't normally get it. And I became really interested in how people understand information and how they process and make connections. Particularly, my interest was in how do we make the world a better place, not how do you win political campaigns. So I went from that job working for another partner into consulting, where we did just that, and we used data tools, and we used different approaches for emerging databases and ways of analysis to track the public presence of companies like Procter and Gamble, or like or even NGOs like Greenpeace. So quite a wide variety of organizations, and trying to help them understand how do you interact, and how do you become better within a context of public interest. So this is a theme that went in my life quite a lot, and is really, like, I would say my work after that has really been about and still about how do you help people, organizations understand their interest better in the context of public interest and in the context of those with whom they have to work. So that's been an abiding interest of mine. I worked after that. My wife and I moved to Geneva, and I helped start something called the International Center for Trade and Sustainable Development. And I spent nearly 20 years in this field, in the international trade and investment policy arena, trying to contextualize and help actors, including governments, business, and to understand how they could better use the trade and investment policy frameworks to advance sustainable development. In between, I went back to the US and I became the editor of a magazine called the Nonprofit Quarterly. And the Nonprofit Quarterly was all about helping, basically creating a community of practice with NGOs and philanthropies to help them both share practice and understand better how to manage organizations that don't necessarily have only a profit motive, right? That they have other outcomes. We'll come back to that, because that's a challenge these days as well, is how do you measure when you may not have adequate measurement? How do you judge whether you're having an impact? And this domain is really a challenging one for doing that. So that's essentially me. I came back to Geneva. So we've lived here in Geneva twice, and I came back, and then about 3 years ago, I started getting into the regenerative development field. I stopped working as intensively in the trade and investment field, and started moving into understanding what's happening in the regenerative development field. And that comes out of my longstanding interest in sustainable development, and also feeling really for the last almost decade that sustainable development was not adequate, was not the Agenda 2030, and we're almost exactly 30 years out from Rio and from Agenda 21. They've been really huge advances, but not nearly enough to actually meet the real needs that we have. And the challenges, and they're very significant existential challenges around climate, around species loss, and so on, are tremendous challenges at the same time that we have all these new capacities. We have technical capacities, we have understanding of how complexity works. And increasingly, people, companies, academics are understanding complexity. So I've been working for the past few years with the Global Regeneration Collab, and working with what I call regenerative pioneers, people who are trying to create systems, holistic and sort of mutually reinforcing systems that actually generate value across all of their activities, environmental, human, economic, and so on. And one of the things that I've noticed in this field is that there still remains a lot of innovation that's in a sense trapped, that people aren't necessarily able to access it or communicate it, and it still remains in silos. So this is why I got to Third Horizon Earth, which I call a practice accelerator for regenerative development, and it's focused exactly on that kind of interaction. So maybe that's enough for now. Let me stop and see if
Wow, thank you so much, Andrew. I have known you for the past couple of years, but I didn't know you have such vast experience, coming from the US to Geneva and going back. And now you're back again in Geneva. So what does Third Horizon Earth mean? Why is it third?
So the Third Horizon Earth concept. So first, let me say what the business is. It's a nonpartisan, I call it practice accelerator, to help generate knowledge and learning, and not only generate it, but to learn from how it's happening in the field and try to make it more accessible and help other innovators that are able to access it and to share their own innovations. It's called Third Horizon because we've been thinking about innovation historically as a new thing, a new app, a new process, and so on. Those are innovations, but the kind of innovation we're talking about with Third Horizon Earth is a really different kind of innovation. This is innovation where people are trying to conceptualize value and optimizing those values across the entire operations of organizations and networks of organizations. So it's a different way of thinking about innovation. The concept of Third Horizon comes from McKinsey, from some partners at McKinsey from the 1990s. They were thinking of it in the business context, and their idea was, well, you have a first horizon of innovations that are kind of really in your grasp. A second horizon, there are things that you may or may not pursue. You need to research them more. And then a third horizon, which are really the seeds of future innovation. And you don't really have any idea which of those seeds is going to actually germinate and grow. And so you treat that third horizon in a different way. It's more like a portfolio that you cultivate, and it may come from different parts of organizations or networks. It doesn't necessarily come from a product development or a market development. It may come from anywhere. And so this concept of a different innovation, and an innovation that's considerably ahead, was one that I thought represented the kind of thing that, and the kind of pioneers and innovators that I thought would be worthwhile to join and figure out how to hasten that flow of information amongst them, between them, and to try and make that kind of innovation more intelligible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Andrew. And actually, when I attended some of your sessions, right, your weekly sessions, some of your members were talking about regenerative agriculture, for example, right? And the very specific point about the difference between sustainability, as you earlier mentioned, sustainability and regenerative in terms of, or in the context of regenerative, I'm starting to sound like a tongue twister, but regenerative agriculture is an alternative means of producing food that may have lower or even net positive impact on social as well as environmental areas, right? So what are the key elements when it comes to regenerative development that is so different from sustainability?
So first, for me, the big difference is that sustainability, as it's been conceived originally, right? Go back to Agenda 21, and we've inched forward, but mostly it's been about taking what we can without depleting what's there. That's kind of how it started. Of course, people knew that this is not that people were ignorant, right? It was the best we could do. They knew that there were complex systems, and we created these targets, and we did the best we could. That model, and remember that SDGs, the sustainable development, what we talk about publicly now is what you call least common denominator. It's what we could agree internationally. That's almost by definition least common denominator. So within that, that's sort of been the direction of travel for sustainable development. In between, there have been a group of innovators, going back to Club of Rome, the pioneers like Donella Meadows and others, who are busy thinking about doing systems thinking. You can think of Peter Senge was also doing it in the corporate sector. People are trying to think about, well, actually, how does this really work? How do these systems really work? And then in the background, there's been this whole other narrative of people who are thinking in systems and trying to understand how these systems operate and how do you, what is performance in the context of these kinds of systems. And at least I think the sort of the current thinking is that performance is really not maximizing any particular element, but optimizing the different elements that you care about. So it's holistic, systemic, value producing at every stage. In conceptually, it's quite different from sustainable development. But I make the distinction because in my world, at least in my view, there are many people who are working with the SDGs, with sustainable development, who are really thinking ahead. There are a lot of them. They're in the current context. There's some big organizations, you know, a lot of the large NGOs, even the business associations like WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You have corporations like General Mills and Danone. They're starting to use the terminology and they're starting to think, how can we connect with these kinds of ideas? At the same time, you have all of these innovators, and there are thousands of them. Okay, they don't necessarily, hundreds of thousands maybe, they don't think of themselves necessarily as regenerative development. Like you could think of the maker movement, right? There's a lot of people in the maker movement who are thinking like this, not necessarily identifying with being regenerative development. So I think there are a huge number of people who are starting to think, how do I create value in systems, and how do I think about that? And how do I make it work? Because this is one of your questions. How do you make businesses work that incorporates values that aren't necessarily rewarded in the market? And I think this is a huge challenge. So you have tons of these innovators, and a lot of them are creating beautiful, beautiful projects all over the world. Some of them low tech and some of them high tech. So it's all over the place, but they're all conceptualizing in systems. And but being paid for example, how to, you know, the easy one is those who reduce carbon can, you know, become you know, they can start farming carbon, for example, and selling carbon credits and join something where they can be reimbursed. But this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of where and how people are generating value. So they're generating better lives. They may be generating soil health. They may be improving biodiversity. They may be, you know, they may be doing a whole range of things for which we don't really have metrics, nor do we have markets. Part of what Third Horizon Earth intends to do is try to build that infrastructure in a nonpartisan way, one that benefits all actors in the market by raising up that way of innovation, by highlighting that way of innovation, showing the stories of pioneers, showing how they think, generating a language that people understand. And there are already a lot of people who are out looking for markets and trying to create markets and metrics, you know. So this is a part of what Third Horizon Earth is trying to do, is build that sort of that substructure, that public structure around narrative, around innovation, you know, around what value means for businesses, for government, for financial sector, and for civil society.
So there's a close relationship between what you said earlier about how to measure what's non-measurable, and also creating values or financing, like monetizing those values that are not measurable, right? Do you have any successful examples of projects in the regenerative development field so far?
There are a lot of them, but the truth is, I think that almost all of them still depend on the you know, on the kind of metrics that are you know, they depend still on the financial metrics, right? And branding. You can look at you know, for example, Patagonia Provisions is one. All right, they're in this field. But you can also go to like the Andhra Pradesh natural farming, super low tech, huge area in India, where people are, you know, in a very arid part of India, have brought back crops to, you know, full-time 365-day-a-year crops that are replenishing the soil, providing food, cooling, you know, they're doing all those things. So there's this, you know, just a vast swath of them. You have the Climate Foundation run by Brian von Hertzen, which is beautiful. It's based in Australia. They're creating what they call marine permaculture, and they're regenerating seaweed, bringing back seaweed growing communities. The seaweed can be used as food or fertilizer, and so it's reducing carbon. It's retaining jobs, because one of the things that's been happening is that the seaweed has been disappearing, so the jobs have been disappearing for people who depend on that. They're trying to reestablish ocean current. It's very, very interesting. There's tons of them, Wakako. So are they successful yet? Some of them, a lot of them are successful. A lot of them are not making a lot of money yet, right? Because we don't, you know, I think so far at least, we need markets that reflect that value, and then people buy that value. And we don't really have markets like that yet. We have a lot of people who are working on metrics. Most of the people who are working on metrics are still within the Sustainable Development Goal framework. So in my view, they're going a long way, but they're not necessarily designing into metrics that will work if you're thinking about systemic innovation. So we've got a long way to go, I would say. But the people are innovating out there, and they're, you know, I just talked to a man from Sweden who's created a beautiful system around school food systems. And instead of centrally sourcing and distributing large amounts of food with the same menus in the same schools every day, he's helped create this system that will source local ingredients around each school, enable the schools to have differentiated menus, provide training for students to work in those kitchens. So it's a you know, and that both reduces food miles, it increases the demand for local organic and regenerative agriculture. So it's got all these, you know, it's all got all these virtues, and it's helping to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's a step on the way to regenerative development. So they're all over. They're amazing, and they're inspiring. And part of what they need is this environment that actually recognizes the value. This is where we are now. People are ready to create amazing value that engages people, makes them healthier, improves the earth, you know, and brings back and creates vital communities, but we don't yet value those. So this is where we are. We need to figure out, how do we value them in a way, and then how do we create systems that support them? Part of that's financial, part of it's government. Government has a big role to play.
Yeah. But usually governments follow what we consumers do. And, you know, we have to first raise our voice, right? Loud enough so that the governments care. And as you said, those so much valuable things that do not have yet market as of today, but with so much potential going forward, right? In 10, 20, 100 years from now. And that depends, but our value system, as you rightly described, currently depends on the existing financial system, for instance, right? So, but one of the ways we could change that maybe would be to use a new financial system that's emerging, such as blockchain. And so that, you know, we would be able to find a new way to monetize those truly valuable, innovative means of, regenerating what's being damaged or lost.
Yes, yeah, and there are a lot of people working in the financial side too. There's a project called Seeds, which is trying to do just that. but there are a lot of them. So I think there's this innovation is happening, and I think where partly where we're stuck from my perspective is that there are a lot of these innovators who just aren't yet either able to sort of punch through the surface of public perception because they're already doing amazing things, or able to sort of share horizontally with other innovators that helps generate this flow across the field for this kind of innovation.
Right.
So, yeah, but you're right. It's like it's not going to come automatically. People need to see it, and they need to see what can happen, and that there can be a better alternative than the one we thought.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you just described about, it's still sort of being silos and not really, horizontal yet. And one of the things that I was trying to describe earlier was to have a platform or some kind of, like virtual world where we can visualize and actually see who is doing what in, I don't know, in Portugal today, what's the hottest topic that I can contribute from Tokyo? That sort of technology is what I envision, but not sure how it will come about.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of experimentation. I don't know if I'm reaching for that platform that you're describing. Part of what I'm doing is going to address that. Part may not. There are people who are trying to create digital twins. One of the things is, and this from all your experience in trade and business, is that we've already become pretty good at understanding complexity, like supply chain complexity, like manufacturing, flows of materials, financial flows. Okay, and we're also getting good at it in other domains, for example, around software and so on, but also around dynamics of how humans behave. So the complexity is really part of our world now, and we sort of need to turn our skills toward how do we apply it to things that are going to make us much healthier, much happier, better, more thriving societies, because we have the capacity to do it. The capacity is there. I think the innovations are already there in their seed form, in their third horizon form. What we need to do is cultivate them, create that fertile soil in which they can grow.
Yeah,
that's one of my goals anyway.
that's so wonderful, Andrew. Thank you so much. And so to conclude, could you, to the extent possible, share your vision for the short, mid to long term?
Yeah, I mean, the long term, it feels utopian, doesn't it? I think for many of us, at least for me. So I think that actually, with the capacities we have, in a way, this is the easiest to envision, because we have tremendous technology. Energy is about to disappear as a big issue, even in spite of our problems right now with Ukraine and Russia, right? But energy is diminishing as a big issue. Food is diminishing, again, notwithstanding the problems we're having right now. But these are things, historic human challenges that are on the verge of solution, which is amazing. It means that we have the potential to be different. The short and medium term is, how do we get there? Whose future is that, right? Is it a tech utopia with with the same people on top and many more underneath? We could replicate what we're doing now, or we could have a different kind of world where people are fulfilling their aspirations and having decent lives in a much greater way. And so I think that part of how we get there has to do with how we talk about it. So at least the theory of change that I have for Third Horizon Earth starts out so simply. It's literally just observing what's in front of us and how do we think about it. It's that simple. It's the way we describe and talk about things. Then looking at the innovations comes later, but it's about, it's about setting these frameworks of how do we think about things. And I think that's a big job, to think that, and it's a huge shift in mentality for all of us, because we're used to living in this world of significant shortages and war and so on. So how do we get out of that mentality? Because we could get out of that mentality. That's for me, that's the real challenge, Wakako. And I think that part of it is we have innovators who are already thinking into that. And part of it, and so they're essential. And then I think part of it is the stories we tell each other and how we observe what's in front of us. It's a very long business, right? So that's going to go on long after I'm gone anyway, hopefully. So I'm trying to give it a little spin of the wheel to get it going.
Yes, that's what each of us can do. And as you mentioned earlier about Martin Luther King Jr., right? Two heroes. And then my first one is the same, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And second is Muhammad Gandhi, right? And his saying, that's it, so close in my heart, or close to my heart, is when he passed, he said, "My life is my message," right? And when I pass, I like to say the same, right? My life is my message. So, all we can do maybe is to spin the wheel on day-to-day basis, but that's, going to create the chemistry important enough, valuable enough to move us forward.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for your valuable time and all your insight. And I will join one of your sessions again soon to
Please.
see what is going on, and also your Third Horizon Earth activities. So please do keep in touch.
Thank you, Wakako. So just a note, Third Horizon Earth is not yet launched. It will be later in the year. So keep an eye out for it. And it's been a pleasure talking with you, and having the opportunity to share and reflect. We don't get that often. So
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and see you next time.